With victory from pole position this past weekend in Monaco, has Lando Norris shown he's got the minerals to challenge his teammate Oscar Piastri this year? What will the flexing wing rule changes mean for McLaren and other teams this weekend from Barcelona onwards? And is Max Verstappen any good at Mario Kart? He probably is, isn't he? This is On Track, talkSPORT's motorsport show, available on the talkSPORT podcast network every week on talkSPORT 2 and on the talkSPORT Driving YouTube channel as well. So make sure you hit subscribe and click the little bell on the talkSPORT Driving YouTube channel. And of course, you won't miss any of the videos we put up from the world of motorsports that we cover. I'm John Jackson, joined this week as ever by our former British F3 and F3 and F2 commentator for Sky Sports, Piers, as we look back, first of all, with the On Track recap on the Monaco Grand Prix. All I'm going to start with, boring.
It wasn't exactly a thrilling race, was it? But we haven't seen a thrilling Monaco race in a little while. I actually think it was better than it could have been, given the two stops that were added as a mandatory thing to do in the race.
Right. So let's just get to it then. Lando Norris qualifies on pole position. I actually enjoyed qualifying more than the race itself. And I think that's probably the same for a lot of people when it comes to Monaco, because qualifying is, well, where they actually probably win the race normally. And Lando Norris was pole position by, 1/10 of a second ahead of Oscar Piastri. And then Charles Leclerc got on pole position. And then with his very last lap, the red lights were on. The session was coming to an end. Lando Norris snatched pole position away from Charles Leclerc, putting him in between the two McLarens. And that was actually a thrilling kind of finish to qualifying. And it did really set up the race. And when you watch this as a racing driver and someone who commentates on racing, do you think, okay, that's what's the percentage chance of winning that race, would you say, when you see Lando Norris putting the car on pole position?
With the situation as it currently is, probably up towards a 90% chance of a win from pole position. And I agree that a lot of people that the race is generally pretty boring, and I can understand the point of view that people are saying, why is Monaco still on the calendar? There's no racing. It's boring. It doesn't have a place. It's outdated and that sort of point of view. However, I agree with those points. However, I think that it still has a place, because it's probably the biggest challenge of driving skill, and the place where you get to see the drivers actually how fast they're going, the level of skill they have with these cars. Because in qualifying, it's one of the most exciting qualifyings of the year. And I think having a variety of challenges on the 24 or 25 race calendar that we have at the moment, I think is important. If every race was the same, it would then become a bit dull in another sense. But the fact that there's a different challenge here, the teams and the drivers have to work differently to get the lap time out of the car. The average speed is so low, the corners are so tight. I've spoken to McLaren, and I think the other teams do the same thing, but they have to bring some bespoke parts to Monaco just to get around the circuit. They have a different steering rack, which is basically how much the wheels turn in comparison to how much their steering wheel turns. They have it so that the wheels turn more at Monaco than anywhere else, and effectively it's a bespoke part, and it's interesting to have that challenge for the teams and drivers. And then the drivers have to deliver on a Saturday, because if they don't, then they know they're not going to have a chance of a win. And we can see some shock results like we have seen in years previous. I think it was 2 years ago when Alonso nearly got pole position, and we wouldn't have had that at a normal racetrack.
You've seen it on the Fairmont chicane when you got the in-car view, how much they have to turn, and they're kind of turning the wheel and then they're kind of pushing it around from the underneath to get it round far enough. So that's obviously that part there. When you said they brought spare parts and bespoke parts for Monaco, I thought you were going to suggest maybe hammocks for the mechanics to sort of put up, when they fall asleep mid-race. Just kidding. They got 2 pit stops to do this time around. What do you make of the 2 pit stop situation then? We've heard what Max Verstappen had to say of it. He thinks that even with 2 pit stops, it still doesn't really change anything. Did you think it kind of achieved what it was meant to achieve?
I actually do. As much as it didn't turn the race from a snooze fest into an absolute nail biter, it added an extra layer of jeopardy. I mean, before the race, everyone in the grid was talking about the fact that they didn't know what was going to happen. They didn't know how it was going to play out. And if it was a one-stopper, everyone would be on the grid going, I know exactly how this is going to play out. So I think it added something. It would be cool if they kept it. I do think it added a little bit of something where towards the end of the race, we did actually have a race for the lead. Granted, there was no overtaking, but Lando Norris was pushing, so was Charles. the drivers at the front actually had to do some fast driving because of the way that the two stops made the race play out. There wasn't so much of that maybe in the midfield as we can see. I'm looking at the results now. Everyone down to 6th place Hadjar was lapped, with 2 laps being put on Albon downwards. So that's a bit of an unusual looking race, but ultimately the teams and drivers do what they have to do to get the points that they can. So on reflection, 2 stops did add something. I think it's good of them to actually add a little bit of something else into the mix. I hope it stays in the calendar, and I hope that they can continue to think of things which add some more variety to the race. So maybe next year go, I don't know, something crazy like 3 stops, or they introduce like a hyper soft tyre that they had in the past that you have to use at some point during the race that only lasts 5 or 6 laps, but you can go mega fast. So fair play for them to trying something.
I've got a suggestion. It comes from Max Verstappen. You might have heard of him. He said on Sky Sports afterwards, maybe you can throw some bananas around, referring to the fact that he was suggesting it's a bit like Mario Kart. So he didn't really enjoy that. He didn't enjoy the gimmicky side of things.
Max Verstappen is generally fairly, I don't know what the word is.
Tongue-in-cheek?
Yes. He
Hard to
likes
impress?
Yes, he likes to point out the flaws and things in his own unique way. I can understand the driver's frustrations. I really can, having been a driver myself. Obviously not raced at Monaco personally, but when you're in a race and you feel like you as a driver can't actually do a huge amount in terms of affecting the race result. I mean, they can by qualifying well on Saturday, but once the grid is set, the drivers feel like they're a bit helpless. Their hands are tied because you just can't overtake. I mean, I don't know if we saw any actual on-circuit overtakes. We saw some people pass other cars, but whether they were overtakes or legal overtakes, I'm sure we'll come on to that later on. I'm referring to George Russell specifically. But I can understand the frustration. It doesn't make for great watching. And as a driver, you want to go into racing so that you can prove what you can do. And ultimately, when you feel like you're being slowed up 4, 5, 6 seconds a lap, that becomes very frustrating. However, I do think the drivers could just accept it a bit more, and it would help them. I think George Russell getting frustrated and just saying, oh, screw it, I'm going to take the penalty. I mean, it doesn't look great. And I don't think you should be able to deliberately do something against the rules and come out with an advantage, which I think he still did. He didn't get any points, but I think he still did get an overall advantage after taking the drive-through.
We'll talk about George Russell in a second, but I do want to ask you about Max Verstappen. How do you rate his performance this past weekend? Because he kind of was, I guess, hoping for a late safety car because he was leaving that second pit stop until the very last moment, knowing that he was only really risking finishing 4th, where obviously he would have hugely benefited if there was that late safety car that he was banking on.
Or a late race red flag as well, because we've seen at street circuits, if there's a fairly large crash that almost blocks the circuit, they go to a red flag. And that effectively would have handed Max Verstappen the win if there was a last 5, 6, 7 lap incident, because red flag would have neutralized the race in race order, and then you can change tyres under red flags, and then he would have inherited the race lead. So I think from Red Bull and Max, they executed about as good of a strategy as they could have done. They gave themselves a percentage chance of a race win when it was looking unlikely if things had continued on, and ultimately it didn't go their way. But Max, again, just banging in the results. He's just metronomic. He doesn't have a day off, does he? And in that car, let's I think we're all aware that it's not the fastest now. Qualified, It was 4th, wasn't it? Yeah, he qualified 4th. So decent qualifying. I mean, I'm sure he'll be disappointed, but arguably the Ferraris and the McLarens were quicker. He then drove around, kept with the front group, and then put them in a position to potentially take a win if something happened. It didn't, so he finished 4th. Like, I think he's still proving the level he's at, because, where's Yuki Tsunoda? I mean, he finished in 17th, 2 laps down, partly due to the way that the race fell and the group he was in, but ultimately Yuki's in the same car. He's got the same opportunity to get results. And once again, we're seeing Max Verstappen be fighting for a chance of a win and his teammate being nowhere.
I think it's very smart of him to try that tactic, because you never know, as you say, with these street races. We saw what happened in the F2 race with Alex Dunn starting that one off. That was chaotic. If you get a chance to see that, check that out on obviously the F1 social media pages, because that was slightly ridiculous. We will talk about Liam Lawson and Isaac Hadjar in just a second. It kind of comes on to the next part of the show. Let's now talk about the blocking conversation at Monaco this past weekend, because it seems like it was Williams that looked like they were the main culprits, but it felt like it was actually Racing Bulls that tried the tactic of knowing they could back up the cars behind them to give sort of their teammate an advantage. Can you kind of talk us through how that all kicked off?
Yeah, the blocking term, I think it's important to talk about the terms. In racing, generally, you're allowed to defend your position by moving off the normal racing line and making it harder for the driver to go around you. Blocking is normally used when you're looking in your mirrors and you're genuinely watching where the driver behind you goes and then moving in reaction to them. You're not allowed to do that. The blocking that we're talking about this weekend is actually more of a tactical blocking, because it's so hard to overtake at Monaco due to the fact that it's so narrow, the corners are so tight, and these days the corners are so wide that basically we saw drivers like the Williams and the Racing Bulls, with Liam Lawson most notably, basically driving seconds a lap slower than they actually could have done. Like, we're talking 5-6 seconds a lap over a 1 minute 15 lap time. So they're in the 120s maybe, which is, as a racing driver, you feel like you're literally rolling around. You're driving to the supermarket on a Sunday afternoon type thing. But the reason they were doing this is because if you had two cars close together, the rearward of the two in your team could slow the rest of the cars behind you down far enough that the driver ahead, like Isaac Hadjar did, could then pit and then come out and effectively not lose any positions, because there's a big open space in the circuit that they can then pit back into. So the pit stops that the FIA implemented, the two of them, where it would normally lose you track position, they were able to effectively nullify that. Frustrating to many, especially the drivers, but that's how the race planned out, and it worked really well for a couple of teams, including the Racing Bulls, who managed to get a 6th and 8th position for their drivers, split only by Esteban Ocon, and then Albon and Sainz, who managed to finish in the final points paying positions and get 3 points to the team, which doesn't sound like a lot, but at the end of the year, all these little points add up for the teams who are fighting for those lower championship positions.
Yeah, and of course, Liam Lawson's first points of the year, which is huge for him, given that you've been backing him all season after what's gone on in this kind of season for him that's already felt like, a year-long escapade because of just all the change that's happened and all the struggles he's had. It's good to see him getting in the points. Once again, outscored by Isaac Hadjar again, who we talked about on the show last week, just continuing to impress Isaac Hadjar, not really putting a foot wrong. We saw the kind of reactions he had in F2 last year in the tunnel. There was a kind of moment where he had mad reactions again coming out of the tunnel in F1. So, he's obviously an incredible driver. He's part of the Red Bull family. Of course, he's going to be good, but I didn't expect him to be doing so well and outscoring Liam Lawson. Well, I thought it'd be Yuki Tsunoda, but outscoring his teammate so consistently. So, fantastic for Red Bull. It shows their driver academy up to be great after obviously they went elsewhere and didn't promote a driver initially with Sergio Perez. So all good for them. There was a text conversation, I think an apology going from James Vowles to his old boss, his old comrade, Toto Wolff, about the about the, what was the official term you were calling it?
Blocking. We can call it blocking. I don't know what else you'd call it. So
for all the racing drivers listening, I'm incredibly sorry because I'm using incorrect terminology. But I think so. George Russell, the main one that we saw in Kimi Antonelli actually did something similar, was that George Russell just basically cut the chicane, didn't he? And went ahead and said on the team radio, "I'll just take the penalty." I think he was expecting a 10-second time penalty, which obviously he would have. If they're doing a couple of seconds a lap slower on the track, then that's going to be taken up in next to no time. But then he actually got a drive-through penalty, which takes much longer, doesn't it? So kind of still kicked him. But the fact he could do that comes on to this next conversation of, do you push the rules and should you push the rules, and what will the FIA do about it? Do you expect them to sort of implement some kind of change now because he's shown that does work?
Yeah, George Russell cut the Nouvelle chicane, went past the Williams of Albon, which then meant he got effectively a 30-second penalty by a drive-through, which basically means you have to go through the pit lane at 60 kilometers an hour or 40, whatever it is this weekend. I can't remember the exact number, but you lose a lot of time. But because the Williams were going so slowly, George effectively managed to not lose a huge amount, in all honesty. I'm glad that the stewards and race director, they implemented that drive-through penalty as opposed to a 10-second penalty that we often see for leaving the track and gaining a position advantage. Because if George was able to go past the Williams and then carry on up the road and gain more than a 10-second advantage that he would have then lost or been given as a penalty, then it sets a bad precedent that you can effectively, if you work out that it's better for your race to just drive past the driver illegally, effectively, then we'd be seeing a lot more of it. And I'm glad that the stewards implemented that. I think that going forward, you almost need to have a black flag or something for unsportsmanlike behavior, because as much as I can understand George Russell's frustrations when he's stuck behind a Williams going multiple seconds a lap slower than both he and the Williams can go, and it feels like it's ruining his race. Unfortunately, that is the situation you're in, and I don't think you should be able to just play the system to gain an advantage, because that goes against the whole principle of racing and the principle of sport. I know in other sports there are things like professional fouls and you can bend the rules and situations like that, but I don't generally agree with it, and we need to make sure that it doesn't become something that you can do and just basically disregard the rules for your own benefit. And yeah, potentially I think Russell could have got a more harsh penalty, because I think arguably, even though he did get a drive-through penalty, I think he would have finished either the same position or one position higher than he would have done if he'd have stuck behind the Williams anyway. So yes, he didn't gain any material advantage because he still finished outside the points. In principle, we don't want to see that. We want to see overtaking on circuit. We want to see fair passing. We don't want to see people bending the rules just to get their own way.
He did gain a free meal that evening from Alex Albon, as they shared a photo of Alex paying the bill. So he got something. I think Kimi Antonelli did something very similar. I don't know whether he missed his braking point or whatever, or if it was intentional, but I noticed he gave the position back. Do you think that was a case of Mercedes kind of not wanting to have both drivers pushing the limits? Or, was that maybe a driver decision? What did you make of that one?
That one looked like a genuine mistake from Kimi. The Williams were no doubt braking early into the Nouvelle chicane, because it's a place that if you block the inside, defend the inside on the way into the corner, then it's almost impossible for the driver behind to pass. Kimi Antonelli braked too late, nearly clattered into the back of the Williams ahead of him, cut the chicane, took the position, but then gave it back because he didn't want to get that drive-through penalty. So that's fine. If you go past the driver illegally and let them back through, no harm, no foul. So yeah, I don't think they wanted to risk it with both drivers, because who knows if the stewards and the FIA were a bit more harsh on Ross, and he could have got a disqualification. And then if Antonelli had done the same thing, then both cars would have been out the points. Whereas at least they had a chance of one of them staying in grid position should 2 or 3 cars get disqualified who finish inside the top 10. So I think it's all about rolling the dice and giving yourselves as a team the best chance of a points or points situations if unforeseen circumstances happen. But ultimately, George Russell decided, you know what, I'm bored, so sat behind here. I'm gonna go for it anyway. And he said he enjoyed it. He said he much preferred driving around doing some quick laps at the back end of the race than sitting behind the back of the Williams.
Well, as long as he had a good time, that's all I care about. What do you make of, it's Alex Wirtz, isn't it? The former driver who's, I don't know what his official position is, chairman of the Drivers Association, and he's working with the new track that they're looking at in Saudi Arabia, isn't he? And I think he's maybe looking at if they can make a track in Rwanda. And he came out with some suggestions of how they can increase overtaking at Monaco. And that includes, and we're not going to go into mass detail of this, but moving the chicane forward slightly, which I think is feasible because it's on the dock side. You'd have to maybe sort of take a few barriers out that would maybe impact the residents for a couple of days while they do that. But when it comes to the racing, it would be easy to do. And also the Fairmont hairpin, widening it by literally sort of the matter of a couple of feet. Now, if you've ever been to Monaco, you'll know there's not much space. I see loads of comments when the race is on and people are bored going, well, they just need to change the track. There's nowhere to change the track. Like, it's a tiny little place with buildings everywhere. Space is a mad premium. I saw a car parking space that was being advertised when I was there at 380,000 euros. So basically the price of a house just to buy yourself a car parking space underground. So it's chaotic. And he's worked out that you can maybe widen that hairpin by a couple of feet either side, which would increase the opportunity for overtaking. Is this realistic from your position, Piers? I know you've maybe not seen it in great detail. To me, it just sounds like someone just trying to force and maybe try to, I don't know, make the message of Monaco is not going anywhere stay in our minds.
I mean, I think moving the Nouvelle chicane down a bit, that could help things, because part of the issue is they come out of the tunnel and they're turning right, they have to brake on the crest of a hill, and then it goes immediately downhill into a corner. Whereas if you had a bit of a longer straight before you braked or maybe a wider entry, it would allow more more space for overtaking down there. So I can see that point. That chicane isn't exactly an exhilarating corner anyway, so I don't think it would be a massive loss. Widening the Fairmont hairpin, again, I mean, to a certain extent, marginal gains, yes. If you made it wider on the entry and wider on the outside, then the difference between the inside line and the outside line is greater, so you've got more opportunity for overtaking. But I don't think it's actually going to make it's not going to turn the race from a no overtake race into an overtaking fest. Let's put it that way. You might get one or two extra moves happening here or there. You might even get an extra crash because it just allows a driver to think they can get through when they actually still can't. Maybe that's what they want, a bit of extra drama, but at the same time, it's all wishful thinking, I think, in my opinion.
There was a good analysis of it from John Noble at the race, which you can sort of check out, and they've got some good diagrams of what kind of he's proposing. And the suggestion is there at the hairpin that it would encourage drivers to do dive bombs, which basically adds to what you've just said there, that you probably see more crashes because drivers will go, all right, cool, I'll give it a go. The other one was reprofiling Raskas to make it kind of stick out a bit more. Less of a kind of smooth corner, but again, I don't know. And John Noble's put this in his kind of review there. There's an underground car park with a big entrance there, which is right by the media centre at Monaco. You ain't moving that. So like, unless the nightclub want to change a few things, which they won't want to do, because if you've ever seen that at the weekend, that's going off. For me, it just doesn't seem like it's feasible. It's a case of maybe the cars next year will suit the track a little bit better, and we have to just accept that it's kind of a bit more of a procession. And there's talk of, isn't it, of maybe it shouldn't be a championship round. It's kind of just like a special occasion, a kind of momentous occasion because it's Monaco. I also think that's a bit naff. I think you either just go, you know what, we're getting rid of it, which they won't because Monaco's huge in the world of motorsports and it has the heritage, or we just accept it and hope that the new cars are a little bit better going around because they're a little bit smaller. Make sense?
Yeah. I think it, and I think there's merit in saying that maybe it should be a non-championship round, but that would then devalue the race and then eventually it would fall by the wayside. My opinion is it should stay. It's a unique challenge for the drivers. It's great to see the drivers up close to the walls and therefore it has a place on the calendar, even if the race isn't hugely exciting, because we need a variety of challenges for the drivers.
So Lando Norris wins his second race of the season. He's now got a 3-point gap between him and Oscar Piastri in the lead in the championship. Max Verstappen down 22 points behind Lando. So not out of the running at all. You'd never count out Max Verstappen. What did you make of his performance this weekend? Because it felt like he had a lot of pressure. He had his mum there, he had his dad there, he's probably got his mates there as well. And of course, we were seeing camera shots of his new girlfriend. Don't know, he's not said it's his new girlfriend, but everyone's reporting his new girlfriend is Margarita Corsero, who is a former model, apparently. So she's watching on and she's on all the broadcasts as well. So along with his teammate kind of doing well recently, Lando's got a lot on his shoulders and I think he handled it incredibly well.
He drove a brilliant race weekend. Ultimately, he was the fastest in qualifying, and we've spoken at this at length, that once you're in pole qualifying, you can control the race, and he did. He needs to start stepping things up in the championship challenge. Otherwise, Oscar, his teammates, going to run away with it because his consistency is what's kept him in the front of the field. Closed the gap now, as you said, 3 points is now Lando behind Oscar Piastri, which is effectively nothing when you're fighting for the front positions, because the difference between a win and second place is 7 points. I think it's 25 for a win, 18 for a second. So effectively that can flip-flop based on first and second. If we went into the final race of the season with this gap, it's basically whoever beats the other person on track. And I'm loving it. I'm loving having such a close fight for the championship. And somehow Max Verstappen is still there or thereabouts. He's not quite within a win in terms of points of Piastri, but is just, I think, with Norris. So, it's very close. I'm loving it. I think it's the second half of the season is going to be really interesting to see if Max Verstappen can somehow hang on to the back of the McLarens. And then also, we've seen Piastri's won, the most races this year so far, but Norris is still right there in the championship. Norris has won the most recent race, which is Monaco this weekend. It's literally going to be perfect. This is what we want as racing fans.
It really, really is. We've got to talk quickly, before we move on, to the changes that are coming this weekend and how they might impact some of the teams. Ferrari, because obviously Ferrari had a pretty good race weekend the week before. Was it maybe a little bit more of a bump with reality for Ferrari this time around? Obviously, Charles Leclerc did all right, but I think Lewis was maybe a little bit frustrated on the team radio again.
Ferrari did a good job to have a good car this weekend. It played a little bit to their strengths. They've been supposedly good at low-speed corners, and Monaco is pretty much all low-speed corners. I mean, the fact that Charles was in there, second place, great result. I mean, you can't complain at that. I mean, would they have had second place at any other circuit on the calendar this weekend? Arguably not, under normal circumstances. Hamilton way off the lead group, but still finishing in fourth place, wasn't it? So fifth place behind behind Max Verstappen. Still a good result. I mean, yes, I know there was talk about him being so far off the leaders. He was in a different race, and ultimately he wasn't going to finish higher than fifth place anyway, because he wasn't probably as quick as Max Verstappen and the drivers at the front. The gap ultimately didn't really matter. You know, it doesn't matter if you're fifth place, half a second off the back of Max Verstappen, or fifth place, 31 seconds off the back of Max Verstappen, as he was. So he's a bit frustrated, but ultimately you've only got to do what you've got to do. And a couple of places behind, top 5 finish in his teammate. It's not all bad. It's not all bad. There's been a lot of noise about it. I think it's because it's Lewis Hamilton and we expect big things, but it's not that bad. You know, he's struggled in that Ferrari at points this year. Yes, at the moment Leclerc is outperforming him, but I think that was kind of expected. Leclerc's been in Ferrari for this long. Leclerc's the new generation. He's up there with Verstappen and Norris and Piastri and Leclerc and Russell and that lot. So he's going to be one of the champions of the future. And Hamilton is probably on the decline in his career. So if he's not banging in the results right next to Charles Leclerc, is it the worst thing in the world? It doesn't tarnish anything he's done in the past. He just wants to go out there and race and get as many points from a Ferrari as he can. And he is. I mean, he's not that far in the driver's standings behind Leclerc, is he? Let's be honest. He's one position behind. What's that? 16 points behind. It's not that big. I think a lot of people are making a bit of a mountain out of a molehill.
Okay, well, I mean, obviously great for marketing as well. I'm sure he's doing loads of different brand deals, and it seems like Formula One is actually doing loads of brand deals. Before we started this, I've seen that they're doing something with Doritos now, probably the official kind of triangular crisp partner of the Formula One World Championship, and they're also doing Disney now, which is another huge thing. We know what they do with Lego. We got the F1 movie that was premiered over the weekend, and we have the F1 Academy series that's coming out this week, and Susie Wolf's going to talk about that a little bit later. And of course, you can catch that interview right now on the talkSPORT Driving YouTube channel. So loads going on in the world of Formula One. Finally, before we talk about these changes, Adrian Newey was in green for the first time at Aston Martin in Monaco, and it seemed that Red Bull kind of knew he would be there because they chose that moment to launch the car that he designed before he left, which looks pretty cool. It looks like an F1 car with kind of like a body kit over it. Have you seen those pictures?
I actually haven't. No, I've been busy at Auburn Park this weekend, so I haven't caught up
sorry,
with that.
I'm terribly sorry. Well, look, I mean, the surprise is kind of ruined for you, but like, yeah, so their Red Bull car, which was the kind of last thing that Adrian Newey worked on. I mean, it looks mega. It's kind of some kind of like hypercar, but I mean, what do you think Adrian Newey's thinking at the moment? Aston Martin have not really been doing much this year, but I think it's no secret that they're really focusing on what he's working on for next year, 2026.
Yeah, eggs in the 2026 basket. Frustrating for their drivers at the moment. I mean, not a good weekend for Aston Martin. Alonso was driving well, managed to get the car inside the top 10, and then pop went the engine. So no points.
Did you hear him shouting at one point? He was being told to put. He'd been told to push, and I don't think his tyres were. I think he was on the hard tyres when he wasn't in the right place to be pushing. Is that a regular driver frustration with someone telling you to push?
I think it's a classic driver being frustrated at the team telling him to do something that he probably couldn't do, coupled with the fact that he's at Monaco and frustrated with the race situation anyway. I think it's short-term pain for them for long-term gain. All I'm saying is, if they don't have a good car in 2026, Alonso's gone.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, well, Lance Stroll will probably stay there until Lance Stroll's had enough, I would imagine. But everything Adrian Newey does, I mean, the amount of cars that he's designed that have won in Monaco, I can't remember what the stat was, something like 7 different cars that he's designed have won in Monaco. I think if you're an Aston Martin fan, you'll know that the future is likely more than, probability would suggest that your future is going to be quite good. So just take that pain for now. Speaking of taking that pain, these changes coming this weekend with the clamp down on the wings and the flexibility of the wings could affect some teams, could maybe show up some teams that have been performing a little bit better because of this. Can you kind of summarise what's changing from Barcelona onwards?
Yeah, so the technical directive from the regulations is that the wings of the car, so the carbon fibre wings at the front and the rear and a lot of other surfaces, but mostly the front and rear wing, they look like fixed objects, but if you watch the slow-mos, you can see the rear wings wobbling around, the front wings wobble as well. But the flexibility that they're talking about is not how much they can wobble, it's actually how much they deflect under a certain load, because there's an advantage to be had for the teams if the wings basically flatten out as they go faster by the force of the air pushing on it as we drive along, pushes the wing flatter, because then effectively you can have more downforce at lower speed, and then the car is more slippery the faster parts of the circuit, which is effectively the straights. So you're almost giving yourself a little bit of a fake DRS. This is allowed because it's impossible to make a component that's out in the air deflect not at all, because all materials have an inherent stiffness and flexibility. But the amount they can flex over a certain load is being changed just to tighten up the things, because we've seen on the onboard cameras near the front wings that the front wings are bending and flattening out down the straights, and they want to just tighten that up a little bit. This isn't a new thing. This has been a recurring theme. I think the Red Bulls of the late noughties, early teens, they were ones that were using this or pushing the limits of the rules. And there was talk about that. They had a change then. It's been a thing in Formula One, basically ever since there's been a complex wing design, because it's in a way of getting an advantage. I think there's rumors that it's teams like McLaren that have been making the most of it. And there's talk that people saying that, oh, well, as soon as this wing change comes in, the McLaren's going to not have the advantage it has before. This is a very small piece in the Formula One puzzle of making a fast racing car. I don't think we should overstate the difference this could make. Yes, it will make a difference, and maybe it will help some teams as other teams get pegged back a little bit. But ultimately, you still have to have a good racing car. You still have to have effective aerodynamics, surfaces, and an efficient car. And McLaren clearly have that. And this is just a little detail, like we see the different changes they make weekend on weekend for the size of the floor. They all have a measurable impact, but the measurable impact is this compared to the whole unit of the car. So I don't expect the order to change a huge amount.
I think it was it Lewis Hamilton's car that got lifted up in Monaco this past weekend, off the top of my head. I saw a picture of the floor of the Ferrari, and that's kind of like a really closely guarded secret, isn't it? You don't want other teams seeing your floor and how air is passed through the car. What are the other kind of ways that teams can maybe bend, and this is not a joke, there's no pun intended, but can maybe bend the rules that have been tightened up before? Because, you've been in and around these single-seater cars, driving them yourself. There's surely little things that can be done to maybe gain a slight advantage.
Well, the thing is, I think when you're involved in motorsport and you're working in an engineering sense, every part of the car is designed within an allowed range. So you've either got an area or a size or a thickness or something that is defined in the rules. But defined in the rules also is a tolerance, which basically means it has to be, let's say something has to be 10 centimeters plus or minus 0.1 of a millimeter. Well, there's almost always an advantage to being either one way or the other. And such is the attention to detail and manufacturing skill of these teams now, that they can make sure that every single measurement is, as far as they're concerned, closest to the most advantageous end of the tolerance. And this is just an example of that with the flexi wings. The wings physically cannot be 100% rigid, because otherwise they'd be 10 feet thick, at which point it would make no sense. So therefore, there has to be an allowed amount of flex. And all that's happening here is the likes of supposedly McLaren are allowing it to flex absolutely as much as it is allowed to. And then basically the rules are just allowing that flex to be smaller. So therefore, McLaren and other teams as well are having to then slightly adjust the stiffness and strength and flexibility of those parts so that they're a bit stiffer, so they flex less. If a team hasn't been using the flexibility of the wing up till now, then my question would be, they're leaving time on the table, because it's been within the rules. It's not illegal up till now. The rules are changing, but the likes of McLaren, they've been basically driving and using the rules to the best of their advantage. So if other teams are complaining, then why haven't they done it? That's my question.
And that's why you get people like Adrian Newey, who are obviously masters at looking at what they're allowed to do and doing and maximizing that all the time. And I imagine then you get into these really deep technical things where if one part is maximized and it's to the extreme, then how does it affect the other part? And then it's like a chain reaction, because then you've got to have all these things moving together. And if you've ever played the F1 game, I don't bother with changing things like that. I just get out there and drive, and I'm terrible. So I'm sure, if you've got a basic understanding of how things work, you'll know that it's an incredibly complex process. So I guess we'll just see this weekend. I don't know how obvious it'll be straight away, but when it comes to Barcelona, these drivers and these teams know that track incredibly well. What are you expecting? You expecting McLaren to still be strong?
I'm expecting McLaren to be the strongest team. I don't think this will change things a huge amount. Maybe the likes of Red Bull and Ferrari and Mercedes will be slightly closer if they haven't been using the flexibility wings as much, but McLaren have been fastest, and arguably they've been faster in the race conditions than they have in qualifying. So who knows, it might allow the likes of Russell, who's been quick at times this year, Verstappen, who's been on pole previously as well, maybe even the Ferraris, if they've got on top of things, to chance it to go for pole position. But ultimately, I think McLaren still have the edge. I think that the order's not going to change a huge amount, and I'm hoping that we can have some overtaking this weekend, because I think that's what everyone would like.
Okay, Piers, thank you very much for joining me. We will, of course, look back at this weekend's Barcelona Grand Prix on this show next week, and we will be covering that with live race updates on talkSPORT and building up to it throughout the week with live guests on our shows. Make sure, of course, you check out the talkSPORT Driving YouTube channel. Hit the subscription button on there. It doesn't cost you anything, obviously, and hit the bell as well, because every time we put a video up, you'll get a notification, and you'll probably be bored somewhere, sat on some kind of train or something like that, and you can catch up with our behind-the-scenes insight from the world of Formula One. We will chat about that next week here on the talkSPORT Driving YouTube channel.